Welcome, everybody, to episode one of Pressing Topics. This is a show where David and I pretty much talk about the headlines of the day, usually with the focus on WordPress, but not entirely about WordPress. And it's going to be a daily show. So 5 days a week. Hopefully you can tune in, listen to us, and you'll be caught up on what's going on in the WordPress community. And David, man, long time no see. Look who's back. Back again. I'm going to tell a friend. However that rap song goes.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife and I looked at the WP Tavern website and I see like the established in 2009. I'm like, geez, that site's been around for 10 years already. And I've known you for almost as long, if not longer. That's crazy to think about.
And for those who don't know, David used to be a co-host on WordPress Weekly back in the day, back in the loving Gravity Forums days. Although, do you still love Gravity Forums?
I still do. I really do. No, and the people that work there are all great too. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
All right. Without further ado, let's dive into today's topics. And this one was submitted by you, David. User self-sufficiency, an article over at torquemag.io. And what grabbed you regarding this story?
So a lot of my time is spent helping users with WordPress, and I can't help but think that, you know, as WordPress has lowered its barrier to entry, it's also increased its complexity, right? So, I mean, we have Gutenberg, we have all these other things, and then how much do we expect, you know, the average user to really be able to do in WordPress these days? And I thought this article on TorqueMag was really interesting because it talks about how, you know, people like myself can work with clients and get them to that point of self-sufficiency or accept the fact that they're not going to, right? So it talks about some things that maybe they should be able to do, like, you know, creating and editing posts and pages, some basic user administration, things like that. And then things, of course, that they shouldn't be able to do, like, you know, bug and error fixing or troubleshooting issues. So it was just a great reminder of kind of the divide of knowledge that people have with regards to WordPress. And I don't know. I mean, we live in a tech world. WordPress has been around for, you know, more than a decade. I can't help but sometimes fall into that trap of thinking, you know, everyone should know how to do this. If you're going to publish online, shouldn't you know how to publish online?
Yeah, and the article is published by Tom Rankin, and he brings up that, you know, you want to try and aim for a balance between self-sufficiency and still being needed. Still having a reason for clients to give you money, and if they're too self-sufficient, well, then you're not needed. And then if you hold their hand too much, that can actually push the client away from you.
Yeah, but I would like to see WordPress continue to work towards making users, you know, more self-sufficient, finding ways to kind of point things out to them in a very user-friendly way, you know, model windows or little like tool tips and things like that, because, you know, my time would be better spent helping develop kind of that next feature or making sure that their site is performant or, you know, those more technical details versus like, how do you add a user to WordPress? Like, they should have a very easy way to understand how to do that. They shouldn't need me to hold their hand.
Yeah, and I guess the ideal balance here is to allow them to be self-sufficient to a point where they can take care of those low-level tasks, and then you stay around to do you know, custom coding, maybe a custom block for Gutenberg, stuff that requires code. Generally, is outside the realm of most clients, I believe.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that, you know, over time, as I've helped people, the issues and challenges that they've have actually kind of continued to swing away from code. You know, back in the old days of WordPress, I had to like custom code everything. Now it's 9 times out of 10, I pull a plugin from WordPress.org, you know, walk them through how to use it, and it solves their issue. So it's interesting how that's changed as well.
Again, we'll have links to all the articles we mentioned in the show notes on WPTavern.com. Yoast, the team behind WordPress SEO, they announced on Twitter today that they are kicking off an empowerment or Empower Women project at Yoast. It's a project to empower women within the company to grow personally and professionally. And they tweeted out an image, a photograph of women gathering together, having lunch to chat about the expectations for this project. And this is sort of a trend that Yoast, the company over there at Yoast, has been doing. I think a few months ago they announced an inclusivity project talking about diversity and women in tech. And this was after the some of the controversial things that happened on Twitter from the SEO conference. I'm glad that's been taken care of. But this is a really neat project, and it's cool to see a company as large and as successful as Yoast talk about empowering women. We need more women in tech. That's all there is to it. And I'm all for equal pay and all the good stuff that comes with having more diversity, inclusivity in the workplace.
For sure. And I think it's great to see companies like this promoting that aspect. I think that we, as a community, especially, not especially, but as well as the WordPress community, really needs to promote the fact that we need a more inclusive environment. I mean, it kind of lends itself to the previous topic of kind of that self-sufficiency. I want to make sure, or I hope that most people in the WordPress community want to make sure that, people from all backgrounds feel like they have a say in WordPress and feel like it was built for them. I mean, we talk about kind of representation in the media, and we talk about the lack of women in tech, and these two things, you look at them and you go, if we get these women, if we get these, other groups that feel marginalized, in a position where they're contributing in a way that they feel is productive and valuable, then they also then become the people that the next generation look up to and say, there's the person that exemplifies who I want to be or the direction I want to go in. So I think this is really great.
And Vinny, names in podcasts, one of the greatest things about doing a podcast is pronouncing people's names. So I hope nobody gets offended if I mispronounce your name, but I saw this tweet by Vinny Kunch, and she says that conference websites, please don't use countdown timers. Don't make me do math to figure out the date of your conference. Also, skip the carousels. I keep having to wait to note down relevant information. So I thought about this, and you know what? I've actually come across many WordCamp websites where they have a countdown timer, or you look at the header, and a lot of people don't put the date of the conference in the header. And I agree with Vinny here that don't use timers, don't let people do or have to do math in order to figure out when the event is. Have the date in the header. In fact, have a place on the page where you can see on every page, so you don't have to actually go searching for it. It's just right there on the page, and I thought it was a good tip.
Yeah, it's funny, right? We get stuck into these like marketing traps as well, right?
But the countdown timer looks cool.
Yeah, and it creates that sense of urgency, like, oh no, if I don't get on this now, I'm going to miss it because there's only 2 days left, and if I forget tomorrow and the next day, I'm out. Like I won't get to go, and so it creates that sense of urgency, that drive to convert, and as well. And carousels, I mean, it's been proven time and time again. Carousels are bad for the internet. They're bad for users. They're bad for sharing information. Like
they're fun to write on.
Yeah. And it feels for users and for clients, it feels like, oh, I'm going to get to put like 10 pieces of information in this one spot on the website. And all it does is mean that, a large percent of the time, I don't see the other 9 things you wanted to share with me, or I have to wait or like click or something to get back to the first one I was interested in. So I think this is a great thing to remind everyone in the WordPress community, not just on conference websites, just in general. Stop using timers, stop using carousels, figure out better ways to do it. And I mean, if you want to use timers, feel free. But again, like Jeff mentioned, it shouldn't be your only data point to be able to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a big announcement over at WPMU Dev.
Yeah, so I think this has been a long time coming. They promised multiple times that they weren't going to do this, but it's going to happen. They're getting rid of, basically they're stopping active development on for their company for a bunch of their premium plugins. So if you're running the membership, the WPMU membership plan for, I think it's like $50 a month or whatever it is, you're probably going to notice that the number of premium plugins that you're getting that are actively developed or actively getting new releases is going to shrink by 90%. So they're releasing all the plugins as they exist today on GitHub, and you'll be able to continue to use them without an issue, without a membership even. But there's certain features and functionalities, bug fixes, security fixes that may not get ported over to these plugins unless some community members pick them up, or some WPMU devs have some free time to kind of work on them. But they're going to kind of shrink their business down to kind of their most popular 10%, just because the maintenance and support and development of this huge catalog has just kind of started to overwhelm them and stop them from doing some cool things in WordPress.
And James Farmer, he's the co-founder and CEO of InkSub, EduBlogs, WPMU Dev. He published this post, and he basically explained that there's a lot of competing products out there for some of the plugins they're doing, and the competition is just simply better. So it doesn't make sense for them to pour in their time and the resources to continue supporting plugins that just can't keep pace. For example, the MarketPress plugin. James admits that they gave e-commerce a try, but WooCommerce wins the deal, and they actually refer people to WooCommerce, and they talk about CoursePress. And James talks about how the first thing he ever wanted to do online was build a great LMS, but by the time he got to it, there's so many great third-party platforms out there already, so that didn't make sense. And many of these plugins, as you said, will be for free and available on GitHub. And in fact, a lot of them will continue to receive updates because, as James mentions in the post, they still use them for their EduBlogs website. So anytime they need to update the plugin for their EduBlog site, they'll be able to put that on GitHub as well.
Yeah. I mean, they say that, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking if they're already pointing people to other actively developed options, why wouldn't they eventually switch to those actively developed options from third parties rather than continuing to focus their development efforts on updating those for their EduBlog system? So I wouldn't hold my breath that they're going to spend a bunch of development time on these plugins. I would say that if a core piece of your business is any of these plugins that they're shutting down, take a second look at some of the competitors and be ready.
And as you said, James admits that, he said time and time again that he wasn't going to do this, but he says in the post, quote, "I've toyed with the idea, been assailed by members of the company to do it, and always fallen back to these core parts of what we are. But the thing is, it's no longer just about me. How our company evolves now means supporting over 100 of my colleagues who rely on me to make hard decisions, even the ones that I may not like, and admit where I was wrong." And he says this is one of those occasions, end quote. And I like seeing that kind of writing from James, the leader of that company. It's nice. It's a good example of leadership right there.
Yeah, I mean, heart on the sleeve, kind of neck on the chopping block in some ways, right? The community kind of has to decide that this is heartfelt enough to not kind of pick up the pitchforks and run around screaming like burn them all down. So I think that he is being as transparent and as fair as possible. I think that this is a smart move for the company. I think that this is a good thing for the community. I wonder if we're going to see more of this kind of thing from other organizations where they pare down their offerings, because I mean, we're getting to the point where, for example, like in the data collection space, right? We have so many amazing plugins like for forms or for like collecting data on websites that, do we really need another contender to come in and do that? We have so many great plugins now for like pop-ups and modal windows. Do we need any more people to do that? And so it'll be interesting to see what the paring down looks like over the next little while for WordPress. Does it let new competitors come in and kind of steal some market share from the big players? Does it, do we continue to consolidate? I mean, it feels like GoDaddy and some other companies are buying everything out there. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the ecosystem of WordPress and you look at the top of the food chain, web hosts seem to be the ones with the most money in the pockets. And they're the ones who, as of late, have been acquiring plugin theme shops. I mean, just pretty big acquisitions as of late. We're not just talking about one product, but entire companies. And was it Liquid Web with iThemes, the company down in Texas? What's the web host down in Texas? I can't think of it right now. Yeah, WP Engine. They acquired Studio Press with Brian Gardner. And GoDaddy, of course, they acquired Rich Tabor and his themes, and Securi. They acquired them. So
Managed WP.
Managed WP. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's pretty good. We could do this off the top of our head, these acquisitions. But I mean, why bother getting into a space that's saturated, especially when there's a lot of great products that are great solutions to whatever problem you might have in the WordPress space. And if you got the money, don't try and create anything new. Just buy it and take it over.
I worry about how that'll make things stale, right? I mean, like, for example, in terms of WordPress core, we have Gutenberg. And there was a whole bunch of page builder systems before Gutenberg came along. And so having Gutenberg as a core development project was a huge risk, right? There was already these people that spent hours learning these other third-party systems. And they decided that this is the direction they wanted to go. And success, I mean, we can't really discuss how successful or not successful Gutenberg has been, but the fact of the matter remains, it'll be interesting to see what that does to kind of those other plugins and options that exist. But I worry that if they don't exist anymore, we won't have those kinds of ideas, right? They all do things differently. They all bring a unique thing to the table. And I don't want to see them all die on the vine and just have kind of one key player for each type of plugin.
Well, I mean, if you look at Beaver Builder and some of the other notable page builders that have established themselves in the WordPress space, I think they actually did the smart thing where they jumped on board with Gutenberg. They actually, some of the developers got knee deep into GitHub and was part of the development process, and they've actually adjusted their products to work with Gutenberg as best they can, which I think is a smart move.
Yeah, I mean,
maintains relevance for your product.
Yeah, it certainly does. Speaking of that kind of transition, right, and the fallout of what happened with WPMU's dev shutting down all these plugins, we see that they've actually pointed to a new option for pro sites. So if you were setting up kind of a WordPress.com clone and you're not going to be able to use WPMU's pro sites anymore, there's WP Ultimo, which there's a huge post about, which kind of gives you an idea of, the features that are gone that you won't have anymore, the features that have been replicated, and some new features that maybe you didn't know that you wanted from pro sites that you'll now get with WP Ultimo. And the post, you'll have to read it. It's pretty darn long, but it goes through each of the differences, each of the updates and the additional plans, roadmap, things like that. And it was great that in the WPMU post that they pointed out some of these alternatives. I really appreciate that they did that. Have you had a chance to look at WP Ultimo, and what do you think?
Haven't had a chance to look at it, but I did in James' post. He pointed to WP Ultimo and said, suggested to Arindo to create a migration script for it or something, and they would advertise it. And I think that's what he's done here.
Yeah, they're working on the migration script. It's not ready yet, as far as I know.
Okay, so they're working on it.
Yeah, he is getting help from WPMU's team to make sure that it happens seamlessly.
So yeah, so if you're using pro sites, this looks like a great alternative that you can migrate to, and I guess just remain patient. You can add your email address here with your name, and they'll let you know when the migrator comes out. But that should make it very easy to migrate from pro sites to WP Ultimo.
Yeah,
and I always like migrations that just require me to click buttons.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and it all just kind of does its thing behind the scenes and makes it all work. I will say, though, that I think some people are going to be a little bummed. Unless you go in there on WP Ultimo and buy the $500 lifetime license, you're going to be paying another kind of yearly fee, right? If you were paying $49 a month for WPMU Dev's premium plan, now you could be paying another $100 a year or more just for this single plugin.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, I could see that being a bit of a bummer. WordPress Translation Day number 4. So this is the 4th iteration of this event. Really cool event. Successfully hosted 77 local events in 35 countries, and it recruited 183 new translators. And looking at a couple of the stats that were published here by Sarah Gunning, this article's on WPTavern.com. I was looking at the active WordPress install locales. US and US English is 46.9%. All other locales are 53.1%. So that's interesting. And what we see here is that WordPress still has a lot of room for improvement and growth in countries with locales, especially with like Chinese dialects, Hindi, Portuguese, and other languages. So it's great to see all these different pictures of people gathering together and translating the various strings of WordPress. And it's very important. I think Sarah covered this last year or during WordPress Translations Day number 3. We're having a locale of WordPress translated into your native language is huge. It's very important for people, and it brings people together in that local area. And to be able to write and publish in a language you're familiar with, that's local to your area, it's a big deal.
I completely agree, but I will admit, as a Canadian, I
Yeah.
typically never install the Canadian version of WordPress. I know that seems kind of silly, but
Do you think at the end of every sentence you write, it says A?
it does usually. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I can't help it. I'm Canadian. And it gets mad at me because I put U's in all these words, and it's like, what is that stupid U doing there? Get it out of there. But yeah, I wonder how many other English-speaking areas or users just install kind of the normal default U.S. English, even if they live in somewhere where American English is not the first language necessarily. I think that would be kind of an interesting thing to find out. I also can't help but notice how few events were being able to be held in both South America and Africa. And there's a ton in Europe, and there's a ton in India, and there's a few in Asia, and there's almost none really in North America. I really think that we look at kind of the projected growth of internet users over the next 10 years, and the biggest area of growth is going to be in Africa. And so the fact that we haven't really seen a huge uptick in terms of translations there kind of makes me a little bummed out. I would love to see some company who has a connection in South Africa or another country in Africa, kind of lead that charge and jump in there and kind of make that happen. They'll be helping potentially billions of internet users over the next decade.
And I think it's key to remind people that the majority of WordPress users are not English speaking users. We've been overtaken by everyone else. So I don't know. That's kind of a cool stat. But and as you said, the largest area of growth for Africa, that's probably likely due to the phone.
Well, it's due to multiple things. So their infant mortality rate is dropping faster than anywhere in the world, right? And so more and more kids are surviving into adulthood than ever before, and so the population boom there is going to be very similar to the population boom in India from a little over a decade to 2 decades ago. So, and as technology gets cheaper, and we start talking about kind of all of the satellites being put in orbit by SpaceX and other companies to give worldwide internet access, they're all going to come online.
Yeah, and in fact, down in WooThemes, one of the WooThemes companies they founded down in Cape Town, South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's
a bit
couple
of a
of
tech scene down there.
Yep, and that's why I say they're already connected to that area. I would love to see them kind of, take the flag and lead the charge.
All right, and to finish up today's pressing topics, I want to let you know if you use the Ultimate Member plugin, which apparently is actively installed on more than 100,000 websites, Sucuri is notifying people that there are multiple vulnerabilities in the plugin. Specifically, version 2.0.45 and lower are affected by multiple vulnerabilities, and among them is a critical vulnerability allowing malicious users to read and delete your wp-config.php file, which can lead to a complete website takeover. That's not good. So they published a bit of information here. They got a file leak and delete issue here. They go through the technical details. Sucuri always does this. They're a great asset to the community. But what you're going to want to do is either disable the plugin or check for updates. Oh, okay, I see. So 2.0.46 is already available for download. So if you're using this plugin, please double check and make sure you update it to the latest version to help protect your site against these vulnerabilities. And anything dealing with the wp-config file, that's a big uh-oh.
Yeah, for sure. And I will reiterate what you said. If you run WordPress, if you're managing WordPress websites, you should be checking this blog often. They do publish a lot of great information here. And I am glad that they were able to patch this so quickly. Again, we don't necessarily know the timeline. They do say that their initial disclosure was on the 7th, so a little less than a week ago. I don't know. It's super interesting that this kind of stuff is still happening all the time. And it makes me wonder, when we're going to see more push towards having real decent firewalls for WordPress powered websites. I mean, it's also the reason why like headless WordPress or like serverless WordPress is getting more and more popular, just because of security. What's really funny about the Ultimate Member mention in this episode, in my opinion, is in the comments for the WPMU dev alternatives, one that's highly recommended over and over and over again in the comments is Ultimate Member. So full circle there in a way. If you did transition already for some reason from WPMU's devs offering to Ultimate Member, just make sure you have the latest one.
Absolutely. So that's going to do it for this episode of Pressing Topics. Again, all show notes, all links to all the articles and tweets that we mentioned on the show will be published on WPTavern.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeffro, JEFFR0. And Dave?
You can find me on Twitter at Find Purpose.
Should I call you Dave or should I call you Malcolm? Which do you prefer, sir?
So I'm in the process of actually legally changing my name, and I've been telling everyone I've had this name for 36 years. So you have 36 years to get it right. I'm changing to Malcolm. It's going to be Malcolm, but I'm giving everyone a huge grace period because it's not a big deal.
Awesome. All right. Well, you'll always be Dave to me, Malcolm.
Perfect.
All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll talk to you tomorrow evening, afternoon, sometime tomorrow. Say bye, Dave. Malcolm.
Bye.
Dave.